Hello everyone, welcome to our very first episode from Police to Priest. I'm your co-host, Father Rix Thorsell, and we're really excited to start this new journey with you guys. So just as a brief background, the person who you're going to be hearing from, the star of our podcast, so to speak, is Dr. Father Joe Ciccone. Now, what makes Joe so interesting, and part of the reason why we're so excited to do this podcast, is that before this second wind of ministry came, he was a police officer for his entire career, becoming the sheriff of a place in New Jersey, Bergen County. Now, just a little bit of background as to why Bergen County is so interesting. It's the most populous county in New Jersey, but it's also one of the wealthiest counties in the entire country. And it has quite a long legacy of a political and social history. And I think as Joe will talk about a little bit, it'll be interesting to view it through the lens of a place where, I don't want to say that corruption was the norm, but it was so ingrained in the system that a lot of times it was just how things operated. And as Joe will attest to, sometimes it still operates that way today. So this is ultimately a podcast about reflecting on some of the more challenging parts of a person's faith. Just as background information, Father Joe and I have known each other for almost a decade now. We met back in our first year of seminary at Union Theological in New York City. And ever since then, our relationship has been able to grow, and he's shared with me many, many stories that he hadn't shared with anyone else. And it got me to thinking, as he progressed in his ministry to move from a law enforcement official to a priest, and to try and reconcile the stuff that had happened in his life prior to becoming a priest with where he stood right now in his own faith and his own convictions, was something that was extraordinarily powerful to be able to converse with him about. And we in our sort of intro podcast of just a brief description of what we hope this to be about, we talked a little bit about the fact that we make mistakes, right? I have made my share of mistakes. Joe has made his share of mistakes. But the mistakes themselves aren't the point. It's what you can learn from them, how you can grow through those indiscretions, how you can become a better person. Ultimately, in this first episode, Joe is going to be sharing something that he has never shared with anyone outside of a very small circle of people. And it's one that details his rise and fall as the sheriff of Bergen County in New Jersey, one of the most prolific positions that one could hope to get. I've always been one to believe that there's power in stories, that if you have the ability to share what you experienced in all its beauty and ugliness, that something good can emerge from it. What's done is done. I think that we see that in the gospel that Joe's gonna read today, that ultimately we suffer, we make mistakes, we're forced to suffer the consequences of those mistakes. But I think that there's hope in that message. Ultimately, I think it's something that we can all take something from, even if we're not forced to experience the kind of intensity that Joe had to endure. But, hopefully there is something to be taken from this story. And if this is something that you end up liking and would like to hear more of, please give us feedback. You can reach us on our social media accounts that we have included in the descriptions below. And as Father Joe would say, go in peace to love and serve the world, and be kind to one another.
Hi everyone, welcome back to another podcast of From Police to Priest. I'm Father Joe Ciccone, and so happy to be with you. I wasn't sure where to start for this one. Do I start at the beginning, when I was 19 years old, fresh out of the police academy, all excited to do this grand work of law enforcement, following my dad's footsteps, and being way too young and naive to do that most critical job? Or, as my gut tells me, do I start on how it ended? How, after 20 years, that amazing career. Everything that I loved doing, everything that I dreamed of doing, came to a dramatic and terrible end. To give me some guidance, I always turn to the gospel of the day. This gospel is the Gospel of Luke, 23, sections 35 to 43. The rulers snared at Jesus and said, "He saved others, let him save himself. If he is the chosen one, the Christ of God." Even the soldiers jeered at him as they approached to offer him wine. They called out, "If you are the King of the Jews, save yourself." One of the criminals hanging there reviled Jesus, saying, "Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us." The other, however, rebuked him and said in reply, "Have you no fear of God? For you are subject to the same condemnations, and indeed we have been condemned justly. For the sentence we revealed corresponds to our crime. But this man, Jesus, he has done nothing." Then the criminal said to Jesus, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus replied to him, "Amen, I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." The gospel of the Lord. That's a great gospel today. It's actually one of my favorites. It reminds me of so many important issues. Most important is that resurrection will follow. But today Jesus is condemned. He's condemned a criminal. Kind of ironic, I spent all of my adult life looking for criminals, trying to arrest them, with the idea that I was making the world a better place. And I think, or hope, in a way I did that. Today I am a priest in the Order of Franciscan Servants. I graduated from Union Theological Seminary in the city of New York. I have an assignment now at St. Joseph's Mission Church, where I bring the gospel to those that are suffering, to people in need, wherever they may be. It's a radical change from when I started so many years ago. I began this journey, as I said, at 19, following in my dad's footsteps, thinking that to save the world, you had to be tough. You had to be serious. You had to do things by the book. And I was a cop by the book. They would joke that I would even arrest my own mother if she was jaywalking. And I really thought that was the way to do law enforcement. And make no mistake, I hope I helped a lot of people. But I also know that I made a lot of mistakes along the way. But I want to talk about the last mistake. It was the mistake that would lead to my path to seminary, to the priesthood. After those many years working first with my dad for about 6 or 7 years. He was a captain at the time as I would struggle to be a detective, and then they made me a DARE officer, drug abuse resistance education, and sent me into the schools to kind of soften me up a little bit, to get to know kids and to treat them a little bit better. I didn't really want to do that. It was the chief's orders, and it was a great order. I didn't see it at the time, but it would be one that would also change the trajectory of my ability to make a difference in people's lives. After that, I went to the Detective Bureau. I became a sergeant. I was elected to the Board of Education. Things could not have been going better. I had just finished a doctoral degree in education. I was very lucky that the police department paid for most of that because I was a training officer. And I loved both education and teaching others. And because of DARE and because of the degrees that kept piling up, I started teaching halfway through my police career. By the time the story changes, I'm a full-time college professor here in New Jersey, a full-time police sergeant on the lieutenant's list, waiting to get promoted, an elected official on the Board of Education, and truly living my dream. Wish I saw it more clearly at the time. I wish I paused and understood, wow, this is powerful. This is really awesome. But I didn't. I kept wanting more. I kept thinking that the next ring on this high wire I was on was going to be even better or more powerful and more important. There was so much ego involved. There was so much of, wow, there's more next. Let's keep going. And I did. There were years that I was a full-time student, full-time teacher, full-time cop. There wasn't time to be even a part-time person or a family person. There wasn't time to stop and smell the roses, smell anything. It was so busy. I'm not complaining because it was a world that I created myself. It was a world that I really thought was important. My dad had recently retired as a captain, as I mentioned, and he did so under some reluctance. He hoped and probably was supposed to be the next chief of police, and it didn't happen. He got skipped over. He had his time in, nearly 30 years on the police department, so he put his retirement papers in and retired. When he did that, I really believe he made himself sick, and within a year, he was in the hospital with cancer and doing really badly. He was letting his sadness and anger eat him alive. One of the people that some believe were responsible for that was a high political person in Bergen County. And a short time later, I was beckoned to that person's office and asked if I would be interested in running for political office, the office of Bergen County Sheriff. Although I thought the idea was interesting, I was scared. I was apprehensive. In a way, I didn't even trust this person. I know what had happened to my dad, and I didn't want to be embarrassed, nor did I think I could do this. And I was told, you probably won't win. Democrat hasn't won this office in 25 years, but it'll give you great name recognition, and then next time you could run for assembly or even something higher. I think it's worth a shot. And the Democratic Party will support you. I went home. I called my dad. He was in Florida. And he said, fly down. I want to talk to you. Hopped on a plane, and I went to talk to my dad. We talked on the side of a pool overlooking the Gulf of Mexico. And I said, Dad, I'm worried. I'm worried about, my personal life coming out. I'm worried about so much. I don't think I could do this. I don't have any experience on this level. My dad, a former Marine, tough as nails, and always knew what to do and when, said, you are going to do this and you are going to win. Get back on that plane. This is going to be awesome. And I listened. This is the first time Dad and I had a heart-to-heart talk that was so positive and so upbeat. I flew back. I entered the race, and 8 months of intense political posturing took place. I went to every town, to every village. I went to every town meeting. We marched at every rally. I went door to door introducing myself. And for the first time in over 2 decades, a Democrat became the Bergen County Sheriff. I had won. Little did I know it would turn out to be one of the worst experiences of my life. It didn't start off that way. It started off really great. But that old familiar problem of letting things go to my head and acting out of ego was a little bit problematic. I remember a day, only about 2 or 3 months after I had won the election, Dad had walked into the sheriff's office, and it was a huge place. 500 offices, nearly 300 civilian personnel. We were in the courthouse, the jail, the Bureau of Criminal Investigation. It was huge. Dad walked into this opulent office. He didn't have to be announced anymore. Everyone that worked there knew who he was. And I was in a meeting, a small staff meeting, and I was actually rude to him. I said, Dad, I'm at a meeting, be announced. Oh, sorry, you're absolutely right. And he walked out, and sadly, he would never come back. He went back to Florida for a little while, came back sicker than ever just a few weeks later, and then he died at 64 years old. I was in office just about a year. One of the first of many mistakes that I would make. But the work went on. I started doing things I only dreamed about. I recognized that we had over 2,000 inmates in that jail, and most of them were minorities. And literally we had 5% of the sheriff's department that were minorities themselves. So for the first time in history, I called civil service and said, I have so many Latino inmates, but I have no one who speaks Spanish. How do I fix this? And they said, that's an easy one, Sheriff. You call for a bilingual test. And so I did. So for the first time in New Jersey history, I gave a test geared for just bilingual officers. And that was our first class. A group that was all Latino that would soon be a model for the state on how to do proper law enforcement, to represent the community. It worked so well. Short time later, I did the same thing for females, because females were sorely lacking in the sheriff's department. And that was an easy one too. We didn't even have to give a separate test. All we did was call for a list of just female candidates, only because there was a need. And for the first time ever in the state of New Jersey, there was a full police academy class of just women. It was totally awesome. Everyone loved it. Well, not everyone. The union didn't like it at all. Shortly after, they would have a vote of no confidence that this white privileged sheriff that was leading them wasn't really taking care of them. Votes of no confidence, horrible signs hanging over the parking lots that I must go. It was a dreadful, dreadful time that was coming more and more challenging and more harsh. And it was taking its toll on me. They started an investigation concerning my fundraising practices, they being the prosecutor's office, my equal in county government. And they arrested two of my closest friends. One right in front of the police academy class that he was teaching. Short time later, a dear friend that I had worked with when I was a city cop for over 10 years. They arrested him at midnight at his home and took him county away to a fast food restaurant, convincing him to turn on me, to condemn me, to rat me out for things that I was doing. To be honest, I didn't do anything that was radically wrong. What I did was govern just as other sheriffs had governed. I governed in a hope to get reelected. I had a tremendous amount of political parties, and all of my sheriff's officers wanted to go. But after the investigation started, their feelings on that changed. They shared that they were being intimidated and forced to go to political fundraisers and parties, and the allegations became worse and worse and worse. At one point, two very close friends, one a college student that I had taught years earlier that followed me through the whole campaign, the other a young man who worked with me in Fairview. He was a special officer and actually worked for the DPW. I loved his mom and dad so much. He was a kid who just needed a break. I had hired both of them, hired without a test. They were both investigators. They came into my office and asked for a meeting. And the meeting was about political fundraisers, and they shared with me that I had gone over political contributions with 6 people, and that they had given us more money than they were supposed to. All that money was in a campaign account, and that is very common. So they asked, what should we do about this? And I said, actually, it's called an elect violation. It's not a big deal. If we get caught, we have to give the money back and say sorry. So just disregard it, and what else do we need to talk about? It was a simple line. I did it without a blink of an eye. Should I have? Of course not. I was smarter. I knew better. I made a mistake. I should have just said, give the money back immediately. We're better than this. But I didn't. The problem was, at that moment in time, after my dad had died, my mother was the treasurer for the campaign. About a week later, my lawyer, great man, Jay Fahey, was the former Bergen County prosecutor, very powerful man, came to me and had a copy of that tape and listened to it and allowed me to listen to my own words. My own words by my two dear friends, one on each side of me. Not that I felt like Christ that day being condemned by the two criminals on each of his side, but it was one of the most heartbreaking days of my life to listen to those voices. The promise was kind of interesting that my lawyer said, unless you resign in 48 hours, they are arresting your mom for violation of elect fundraising laws. She won't, we'll get her out of jail. She won't be there long, but they will be handcuffing her and taking her to jail. I'm saying, Jay, that's impossible. We can't have her arrested. That's why they gave you 48 hours to get your affairs in order, go file for your pension, and then you're done. And I did. Literally, within the hour, I was driving myself to Trenton to fill out my pension papers. I would come back, clear out my office, and the following day, I disgraced myself, the badge that I so loved, and everything I believed in. I did it in front of New York television cameras. There was about 10 in the room. I told no one I was doing it, not even my beautiful mother, who watched it live on television that day. Talk about heartbreaking. I mentioned my lawyer who was giving me advice at the time, an old family friend, one that I had literally listened to as I graduated the police academy. He was a former U.S. attorney for New Jersey and an amazing prosecutor for Bergen County, who truly was helping people back in his day. His advice to me was sure and swift, and he was recommended by the powers that be that I should use him, and I trusted him. Maybe I trusted him too much. When the investigation broke, one of the first things that was done by the prosecutor was to seize all of my political funds. They froze all the money that had been donated to us as sheriff, nearly $1 million, which totally inhibited my ability to do anything, to hire lawyers, to be able to protect myself or my family, to do anything. They just locked down all the money. It was an amazing show of power that I didn't even realize that we had in law enforcement. It would only be a few days later when Jay would say, do you have any personal funds in the bank? And I had worked all my life, 2 and 3 jobs. I saved every penny that I had, and I did have a substantial amount of money in the bank. And Jay said, let's transfer that money into an escrow account for the law firm. And that way it's protected and they can't seize that if it's in the hands of us, of the lawyers. I had never even heard of that, but of course I trusted my lawyer, and I handed over all of the money that I had to my lawyer, to Jay. It would only be a few weeks before we would do a plea agreement, a simple plea agreement, where I would say that I demanded funds from government employees to attend political functions. It's a little known law I didn't even know existed. But I took the plea to make sure my mom didn't get arrested, and also to get my police pension, and also recognizing that I did have to take responsibility. I did allow my staff to do things the old-fashioned way, the way that it is still done in most political offices. But the deed was done. I took responsibility, and I was out. I filed for my pension. 3 short months later, I was sentenced and mortified in front of television cameras by the judge, who reminded me what a disgrace that I was. And for the most part, it was a show. It was all pre-scripted. Everyone knew their roles, including myself, and I left to start my new life. A couple of months later, I received a bill from Jay's office for $10,000. I called the secretary and I said, oh, that's great. Just, take it off the balance of the money that we have in your escrow fund, and that'll be fine. Except it was $10,000 in addition to the $200,000 plus that I had handed over to that lawyer. I was broke. I was penniless and had to start again. I never got to talk about those issues because Mom was still alive. She died 2 years ago, and now I could finally share some of that. And Jay Fahey would go under a Route 17 overpass in East Rutherford after all the things that he had accomplished, and even being a star on television. He was one of the predominant spokespersons for TV law advice. He went under that bridge and shot himself in the head with a gun that wasn't even his. Rumor has it that the reason why was another prominent person that he represented fell victim to misappropriation of funds that they had given him. I don't know, and nor is that the case. I am not here to judge Jay or anyone. The whole point is we all make mistakes. We all trip and fall. But it's what we do after that. It's how we get up. It's how we look at ourselves in the mirror. It's how we deal with the shame and the guilt and the stigma that society and sometimes ourselves place upon us. All of that has led to a whole new world. It was a lesson in humility. Of course, that was just colored by disgrace. It was a time to reflect upon that even when terrible things happen, God has to be there. And God was with me through all of that horrible time. The months would continue with the sentencing that took place and even me trying to explain my actions. But few, if any, listened. But I became more human. I became more accepting of the fact that people make mistakes. And when you make a mistake, get up, try again. I was on the top of the world. And I did not want to get back on the top of the world. I just wanted to get up because I could not have been at a more terrible place during that time. I think what hurt most was the betrayal, the mocking, the sneers, all of the terms used in today's gospel, all of the images that have colored my priesthood and my ministry now for 10 years. Everyone that I meet today gets a second, a third, and a fourth chance to redeem themselves. Everyone I know, everyone I meet has a story. So many of them are afraid to share of it. So many of them are tainted with shame and embarrassment. But I've come to know shame and embarrassment pretty well. When I was 19 years old and that new rookie cop, I called myself another term from the gospel. I called myself a peace officer, a peacemaker. And that's what I thought being a cop was all about. To bring peace, to help people. I so got lost along the way. For many reasons. But the image can't be more clear. I am a peacemaker now, not a peace officer. I'm a peacemaker as a priest. I am here to make people's lives a little bit more peaceful by being a representative of God. I am here trying to make the world a better place once again. But I think I recognize now that to do that, you have to be willing to let yourself go. Even if it's in the worst embarrassing situation you could possibly imagine. Even if it's letting go of all of those dreams that you work so hard for. I truly believe now, when you're trying to make the world a better place, you have to let God be God. You have to be there for others, but mostly in a way that can show the world that no matter what happens, you are loved, you are protected, you are embraced. Jesus would look over and tell that criminal that's going to die any minute, he's going to be sentenced to death. Amen, I say to you. Amen, I say to you. Today, you will be with me in paradise. That's the message that I hope this story has for the world. That even when your dreams come true and they are washed away, tomorrow will come again. Let it come with joy and grace and beauty and love, even in the midst of darkness and fear and sorrow. Because even in the darkest room, one single light can change everything. God love you all. This is Father Joe Ciccone from Police to Priest. Looking forward to talking with you soon.
This is From Police to Priest, a St. Joseph's Mission podcast.